So in this video, we're going to be talking about how to plot the graph you have on page 16 and 17 in your chapter 14 and 15 notes. So on page 16, you have like a graph piece of paper, and on page 17, you're going to see this chart with all the information for the different numbers for each hormone, FSH, LH, estrogen, and progesterone. So we're going to be using that information to plot the graph that is on page 16. So I want you to take your graph and section it into 4 distinct sections. I would count how many boxes there are and kind of evenly divide it into 4 sections. You're going to be plotting 4 sections. One will be the thickness of the endometrial lining, and then you can label the second section as the development of the follicle. And then the top 2 sections, you're going to be plotting the actual graph of the hormones on. So separating LH and FSH into the top part and estrogen and progesterone into the bottom part. So if you go back to your information on this table, it goes from day 1 all the way to day 28. So at the very bottom of the graph, because this is showing the menstrual cycle, we're going to start by numbering off. After you've sectioned your graph off into the 4 sections, we can number day 0 all the way to day 28. And then halfway through would be day 14. I mean, you can fill in every single number. About halfway between 0 and 14 would be about day 7. And then about halfway through would be about day 21. So again, day 21, I mean, not day 28. You can fill in every single number if you would like. I'm not going to because I don't have nearly enough room to show you guys that. So you could actually fill in 1, 2, 3, 4, blah, 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 blah. You're also going to take a look back at in the actual data table that's on page 17. So I'm going to be graphing FSH and LH together. So between the blue and the red columns, the largest number that I have is 45. So I'm going to go on my FSH and LH part of the graph. I'm going to go from 0 to 45. So again, you can figure out what that scale looks like. So whether you're going up by 5s or 10s or however the amount is to make it work in your little section of the graph. We're also going to be graphing estrogen and progesterone together. So if I go back here, the highest number in that one that I have looks like 14. So I'll go from 0 to 14 on that section. Now I know we don't normally graph like this, but we're going to be just kind of making it work with what we have. So again, figure out what your actual scale will look like for that. Maybe you're going up by 2s each box. I'm not sure what fits depending on how many boxes you have in that section. So what we're going to do with the bottom 2 sections, they're not numbers. We're just going to be drawing a picture. So basically, for the development of the follicle, I'm going to be drawing the picture of what's happening in the ovary, but I'm just drawing it in a straight line instead. So you guys can draw this with me, and then after I'm done drawing these 2 sections, you guys can fill in the information for these 2 sections. So development of the follicle would look like this. So starting with the small follicle, and then it develops, and then on day 14 it would release the ovum and then turn into the corpus luteum, and then eventually the corpus luteum would degenerate and get smaller. So that's kind of what I'm talking about with the development of the follicle. And then the thickness of the endometrial lining, it would get thinner all the way to day 5 because that's the flow phase, and then kind of increase and plateau kind of during the luteal phase, and then we start to shed it at the very end so that it can start shedding again during flow phase. So those 2 are just the diagrams that we're looking at. Now what I'm going to get you guys to do is I want you to pause the video, and I want you to graph the top 2 portions for me. Otherwise, it's going to make no sense what I'm explaining next. So pause. Okay, so if you've started the video again, that means that you've actually graphed the section. So it should look something like this. I just kind of made general outline. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of go through and basically describe kind of what's happening at each part and like how they interact with one another. So the very first actual hormone that goes up is always FSH. And when FSH increases, that's going to tell the follicles to start developing. So you guys can draw these arrows with me on your graph because your graph should have been plotted by now. When the follicle starts to develop, it releases some estrogen and progesterone. We talk more about estrogen, so that's where we see that increase in estrogen because the follicle has started to develop. When we see the follicle start to develop, we should see the LH going up significantly. So the LH is going to go up at around day 14, and that's going to cause ovulation to happen, which is right here. And then we turn into the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum releases a bunch of progesterone, so that's why we see an increase in progesterone right here. And progesterone causes our endometrial lining to stay nice and thick. So, for example, stay nice and thick right here, stops uterine contractions, and prevents any further ovulation from happening. And then also, what we're doing is we're trying to get this egg to be fertilized. So if it does get fertilized and implants into the uterus, this corpus luteum will actually stay and will allow the progesterone levels to stay high so that the pregnancy can be maintained. But if this does not get fertilized, what's going to happen is the corpus luteum starts to degenerate, which causes progesterone levels to drop, which causes then our endometrial lining to start to shed, and we start the whole process over again. So this is a really important graph. It's going to be kind of a big piece to your guys' quiz tomorrow. And it's kind of just looking at the whole picture as what we see. So just those levels of hormones. The first hormone that always increases is always FSH, and then we see estrogen, and then LH, and then progesterone. So just kind of remembering that it always goes FSH, and then estrogen, and then LH, and then progesterone. So we made up a saying FELP or FELP to remember it, FSH, estrogen, LH, and progesterone, to kind of remember the order that the hormones go in, and then just kind of remembering the thickness of the endometrial lining at the same time, and also what's happening in the follicle / in the ovary is important to remember. So hopefully this makes sense. Make sure you practice the picture that looks kind of like this. Try practice labeling it. That'll be super important for your quiz tomorrow. Okay, talk to you later. Bye.